Hey everyone, ever stop to think about how the phone in your pocket, the music you love, or even the coffee you drink are all connected by this single massive force? Well, today, we're diving deep and unpacking that force, globalization. Trust me, it's so much more than just a buzzword. It's like this invisible web that literally shapes our entire modern world. You want to see globalization in action? Seriously, just pick up your phone. That slick design? Probably dreamed up in California. The tiny microchips that make it work? Maybe they're from Taiwan. The minerals inside those chips, they could have been mined in the DR Congo. And the whole thing was likely put together in a factory in China. Your phone isn't just a device. It's a tiny, perfect model of how our world is completely interconnected. You're holding a global network in the palm of your hand. And that phone right there is the perfect example of our core definition. At the end of the day, globalization really boils down to two key ideas. First, you've got interconnection. Those are the links, the pathways between countries. And second, you have interdependence. That's how much we all rely on each other. That phone simply couldn't exist without both of those things working together. Okay, so we know what it is, but what's actually powering this whole system? What are the engines that are driving this incredible and kind of crazy level of connection? Well, it really comes down to these two massive forces, what we can call the twin engines of globalization. So on one side, you have technology. Think about it. Faster planes and ships basically shrink physical space, while the internet and digital tech make time feel almost instant. Then, on the other side, you have the massive growth of multinational corporations, MNCs. They're the ones constantly pushing for cross-border investments and building those global supply chains, just like the one that made your phone. So now that we know what drives globalization, let's talk about what it actually impacts. And the answer is pretty much everything. It sends these huge shockwaves through the very foundations of every society on Earth. And the best way to get our heads around these impacts is to think about three foundational pillars: the economy, our culture, and our security. But here's the most important thing to remember. Globalization creates really complex trade-offs in each of these areas. It's never just a simple good or bad story. It's always, always both. So let's start with that first pillar, the economy. When countries open up their borders, you can get this amazing flow of investment and wealth coming in. That's the good stuff, right? It can lead to economic growth, new industries, more jobs. But, and it's a big but, the downside is that you also open yourself up to global market crashes, and jobs can be lost just as easily as they're created. It creates a real vulnerability. It's this constant, tricky balancing act. Okay, next up is culture. Now, on one hand, we see this incredible explosion of cultural exchange and appreciation. I mean, we get to enjoy music, food, movies, and ideas from literally all over the planet. It's amazing. But the flip side to that coin is the fear that all this mixing could start to water down or dilute local cultures, maybe even leading to a loss of unique traditions and heritage. So you've got this constant push and pull between embracing a cool global identity and fighting to protect what makes each place unique. And our final pillar is security. Being so connected allows for incredible global cooperation. Countries can share intelligence, form defense pacts. It acts like a giant shield. But that very same connection creates cracks in the shield. It opens up vulnerabilities to threats that don't care about borders, things like cyber attacks, pandemics, or terrorism. A problem that starts in one corner of the world can suddenly become a threat to everyone. All right, I want you to take a really good look at this, because this matrix, this is the key to the whole thing. It lays out all those fundamental trade-offs we've been talking about. On one side, you have the opportunities, the upsides like growth, cultural exchange, and security cooperation. And on the other, you have the vulnerabilities, the downsides like market shocks, cultural loss, and those transnational threats. If you want to master any debate about globalization, you have to understand how to weigh these pros and cons against each other. It's everything. Okay, so understanding the impacts is one thing, but the next big question is, so what? What do we actually do about it? How do societies, and even just individuals like you and me, respond to these huge, powerful forces? The responses really happen on two different levels. You've got the macro level, that's the big picture stuff. That's governments making new policies, funding big programs, or changing education systems. But then you also have the micro level, and that's all of us, individuals deciding to learn a new skill, communities taking action, or people just choosing whether to embrace or reject foreign cultures. And because globalization hits everyone differently, the responses are, as you can imagine, incredibly diverse. Let's get practical with a case study on the economic front. So, to fight that economic vulnerability we talked about, both Germany and Singapore focus on upskilling their people. but they go about it in totally different ways. Germany has this dual system where they mix classroom learning with on-the-job training right from the start. Singapore, on the other hand, has its Skills Future program, which is all about encouraging lifelong learning for workers at every stage of their career. See, same goal, completely different playbooks. Both are valid responses. And remember, responses are not just about the economy. When it comes to culture and security, you can think of it like a spectrum. On one end, you might have a country or a person who chooses total openness and integration. In the middle, you might find a more pragmatic, managed approach. And on the other end, you could have a defensive stance, protectionism and pushing back. And where a country or a community sits on this spectrum can totally change over time, depending on what they see as the biggest threats or benefits. So, we now have this really powerful framework for understanding how globalization works. But here's the thing. Understanding it is only half the battle. The next step is learning how to analyze it, how to build a strong, clear, and convincing argument about it. And believe me, that's a skill that is going to be valuable to you far, far beyond any exam room. So let's do it. Let's build that toolkit. We're going to break down the specific methods you need to construct a really compelling analysis of, pretty much any global issue they throw at you. Okay, think of any great analysis like a 3-step process. First, you need a solid foundation. That's your AO1. That's just knowing the key concepts, the basics. Next, you grab a microscope to look closer. That's AO2, where you interpret and analyze sources. And finally, you bring out the balancing scales to weigh all the evidence. And that's AO3, where you build your own argument and come to a final judgment. Foundation, microscope, scales. Now, when you're using that microscope for AO2, you're basically running a gauntlet of questions, and each one asks you to dig a little deeper. You'll start with just understanding the basic literal meaning, but very quickly you'll need to move on to interpreting, comparing, and eventually combining multiple different sources to build a much bigger, more nuanced picture. And to really crush it and get those top marks, you have to climb this staircase. See, level 1 is just repeating what a source says. Anyone can do that. To get higher, you need to hit level 2 by making smart inferences, reading between the lines. But the real goal, the top marks, are up at level 3. That's where you're not just reading the sources, you're questioning them, evaluating how reliable they are, and putting them together to create your own unique insight. That's the good stuff. And when it's time to bring out the scales and build your own argument for AO3, I want you to burn this one rule into your brain. Never just make a list. The whole point is to weigh the factors. It's not enough to say what the different causes are. You have to argue which cause is the most important and explain exactly why. That's the secret to a high-level response every single time. And this is where it all just clicks into place. Look at this master blueprint. See how beautifully it flows? The driving forces create the impacts. Those impacts, with all their trade-offs, demand responses from governments and people. And our exam toolkit gives us the power to analyze that entire chain. It's not just a random list of topics. It's one single connected story of cause and effect. And that brings us to our final and honestly the most important thought of all. What you're doing right here goes so far beyond the classroom. You're not just memorizing a syllabus to pass a test. You are learning the fundamental skills to understand, to analyze, and to navigate the complex, messy, interconnected, globalized world that you live in every single day. And that's a really powerful thing.